कभी करती हैं मुलाकातें, कभी करती हैं मुलाकातें, कभी यादों में बरसातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें। मन की गहरी झील में कूद जाती हैं कभी, सोच के दरिया के संग संग बहती जाती हैं कभी। चाहे शाम हो या हो रातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें।
Welcome to Kitaabnama Books and Beyond. I'm here with Janice Parriott, a young and very talented writer. Janice's first book, a collection of short stories called Boats on Land, won the Crossword Award for Fiction, and it also made her the first person from Meghalaya to win a Sahitya Academy Award for a work in English. She's now out with her first novel, which is called Seahorse, and we're here to talk about Seahorse today. Welcome to the show, Janice.
Thank you, Namita.
So Seahorse is a novel about a journey at various levels. We're talking about Nem and Nicholas, the two protagonists. It's about Nem's journey from New Delhi to London, but it's also about his journey through various relationships. Tell us a little more about this trope of journeys that you employ in Seahorse.
Right. Well, to begin with, Seahorse is the contemporary retelling of a Greek myth. And as we know, most Greek myths have the element of a quest. So the hero is given a particular challenge and he must journey metaphorically and literally to overcome certain challenges and, you know, win the hand of the maiden or win the prize. So since Seahorse uses the structure of a Greek myth, it inevitably contains the motif of a journey. So as you said, Nem, the main character, journeys from an unnamed town in the northeast to Delhi, to London, right. And beyond that to the British countryside. And internally as well, it's a journey for him into the past to sort of give a structure to his own past and find out what actually happened when his love and his friend disappeared. Because the idea behind the narrative is that there is an absence. Nicholas, his love, disappears, and Nem must journey to all these places and within himself to find out what happened.
Right. So the novel is a very imaginative reinterpretation of the Greek myth of the sea god Poseidon and his young lover Pelops.
Yes.
It has also been compared to the relationship between Buddha and Ananda. Tell me, and I know that you're interested in mythology, you've written about it, you've studied it. Tell me about when these, these parallels came to you. Did you start off wanting to write a reinterpretation of Poseidon and Pelops? Was there something about that myth more than the other Greek myths that really drew you to it?
Well, to be very honest, after I moved from short stories to a novel, I was quite stuck. Perhaps most writers won't admit this, but I found it really difficult to suddenly work with this vast and, loose canvas. And it terrified me. I had ideas for this story, but I didn't quite know how to fit it all in. And as serendipity, works, I came across Robert Graves' edition of the Greek myths, and these stories just enchanted me and drew me as much as the stories that inspired Boats on Land. And I found that it would work really well if I used the ideas that I already had and structure it alongside this particular myth. And you're right, it's not one of the big myths. It's not about Achilles or Hercules or
the more well-known ones.
Yes, these are the ones that people can just sort of rattle off about. It's a smaller myth. It's, as you said, about Poseidon and his relationship with this young devotee, Pelops, who is a very beautiful young man. And I was drawn to the myth because it is about people breaking apart and being put back together. So Pelops in the myth, which, as you know, all Greek myths are quite gory,
right,
and bloody and murderous. So he is actually literally killed by his father and served at the feast to the gods. But of course, in my book, I don't make a literal translation of that. It's a symbolic and metaphorical reinterpretation, and it is about how people through life go through things that shatter them, and how they are put back together, however imperfectly, and they emerge more beautiful and stronger because of it.
Right, and what about the Buddha, Ananda analogies?
Well, that emerged actually, as you know, writing is a process of being born. So these are ideas that that come along with the process of writing. It wasn't as though I thought of this right at the beginning and said, oh, I must put this in somewhere. As I was writing about Nicholas and his relationship with Nem, it struck me that the Buddha and Ananda shared quite a similar relationship, in the sense that Ananda was this disciple who was most human. He had many faults. He wasn't enlightened like the other monks, but he was Buddha's closest and most dedicated devotee. And I liked the fact that there was a very human aspect to their relationship, and that's how I worked it into the story.
Right.
Yeah.
So Janice, you mentioned that navigating the landscape of a novel and this one structure was a challenge.
Yes.
And Seahorse is broken up into fragments. Was that a way you saw to navigate around this problem?
That's a really good question. In fact, when I first wrote the manuscript, it was a very simple linear narrative. It moved from A to B, and in between there were very neat little flashbacks, and I wasn't happy with it. I just felt that the form of the narrative did not reflect the content. The book is a lot about the fluidity of memory, of time, of gender, and somehow I felt that the manuscript was much too neat, that life is not like that. So I took it apart and I shredded it and I put it back together, in a rough and sort of random manner, because I felt that it was more true to life, that things happen in life that we can't always explain, that we don't always understand. People fall out of our lives all the time. And so the narrative, Nem's narrative, is fragmented. It moves from the past to the present, because that's what we all do.
And that's how we remember things. We don't always remember things chronologically.
Not at all. In fact, we're constantly sort of living in many various time zones, We're constantly reliving our history. We're thinking about an imaginary future. So that's what I wanted to capture.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me about the significance of the title. I was telling you earlier how much I loved the cover design as well.
Yeah.
It's very dreamy and almost mythological and beautiful and fluid and sensual. And I think these are all words that describe the book itself.
Right.
Tell me about how the title came about.
Well, I feel that sometimes explaining something also explains it away. So I would really prefer for the reader to take whatever meaning that they acquire at the end and take it along with them. So the seahorse becomes a metaphor that they shape. But having said that, there were quite a few reasons why I picked this title. To begin with, the seahorse is often depicted in classical art as the steed that pulls Poseidon's chariot in the sea. The seahorse is also an ancient creature and quite a mysterious creature, and I wanted to use it as a symbol of resilience, as something that had been around forever. Another strange thing about the seahorse is that it's it's part of this rare breed of fish where the male gets pregnant rather than the female. And Seahorse, the book, is a lot about overturning our gendered notions about people and things. Gender in the book is treated as fluid, as a spectrum, and I thought that that was a very embracive way of looking at people, and using the seahorse as an ungendered creature was very appropriate.
That's very interesting. It's a poetic explanation, as one might expect from you. Janice, there's a lovely video that you've made, or a friend of yours has made, to promote the book. It's very interesting. I mean, we've seen movie trailers, and I think videos to promote books is relatively a new thing, especially in India. Tell me about the process of making this video. How did this come about?
Well, book trailers have actually been around far longer than I think we are aware of in India.
In India as well?
In India, yeah. So I think it's really important for me to have a visual aspect to the book. We live in such a visual age, and people are caught and enraptured by images. It wasn't easy to work on a book trailer simply because it's about finding the right essence of the book. And if you ask 10 different people, they'll come up with 10 different things. So the director and I worked quite closely on it right from the beginning, and he had set out this rather elaborate plan of making it a 3-part chapter sort of video, and we thought, oh, this sounds quite exciting, and no one's done it before. And then it just didn't work. He said, it's not really reflecting my vision of the book. So I told him, just do what you want, have fun, and just do exactly what you like. And he took these very simple images of this rather androgynous looking young man.
It's very interesting casting.
Yes, walking through the landscape in Delhi, in which the first part of my novel is set. And he uses a piece of music by Bach, a viola sonata by Bach, as accompanying the video, which also features in the book. And we loved it because it was simple and slightly ambiguous.
Captures the sense of the book without being too literal.
Being too explanatory. Yeah. In Shillong, spent part of your childhood there, and you won the Sahitya Academy Award for your first book, which was a collection of short stories, Boats of Land. You became the first writer from Meghalaya to win the award for writing in English. So firstly, tell me how it feels to be identified or labeled as a writer from the Northeast. I mean, do you want to distance yourself from that? What do you feel about that label, or do you think you can, the label can actually help champion literature from the Northeast? So I think I'm one of those people who really does not claim to be a voice for any community or for any particular region. I think the Northeast, which is anyway a geographically misleading term, is so much more complex than anything that one person may be able to say, and we're all phenomenological creatures. We all have a different way of looking at the world. I was extremely uncomfortable with the label to begin with, because I felt that it wasn't something that anybody had asked me about, and that I was being boxed into something that I wasn't entirely comfortable with.
You're mixed heritage. You have British, Portuguese, and Khasi genes.
So I'm really from everywhere, and I do think that good literature, it doesn't really matter where it comes from. It really should have heart and soul, no matter where it comes from. But I also do realize that for people to understand and to sort of easily access something that is unfamiliar to them, we tend to categorize and we tend to label, if only not so much for the other person, but for ourselves. And so when it happens, I let it go. But if somebody does ask me, in fact, there was a festival that I attended a few days back where I requested the person who was introducing me to not mention that I was from the Northeast, to just say, like the other authors on the panel, that I was a writer.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little more about Boats on Land, which was your collection of short stories. That's based a lot on your childhood in Meghalaya. And one of the things that really makes the book stand out is its reliance on the oral tradition. And in another piece you've written for a magazine some time ago, you wrote about how time spent with your nanny, or Kong as you say in Meghalaya, really also drove in this early influence of oral tradition in your life through the story she told you. So tell me a little bit about the oral tradition and how you're mining that for your books.
Whenever somebody asks me about my literary influences, I always never quite know what to say, because as you mentioned, I grew up within the Khasi community, which has always had, until the mid-1800s, a largely oral culture. So we had music and poetry, but we had no script. So my first literary influences were oral storytellers who had never written a word in their life. They never put their stories down. And Boats on Land was sort of a final resting place for all the stories that I'd carried around with me for many, many years. They were stories that I'd grown up with, that I'd heard my father tell people, my grandfather, my grandparents, and it's a very community-driven activity to tell stories in Shillong. We do it at funerals, we do it at weddings, and any other kind of gathering. It's a way to connect to the past, it's a way to remember people. And of course, my Kong, who was my nanny, greatly shaped my love of stories, because she was a fantastic storyteller. She made up mostly everything. But it was also a way of seeing the world that I tried to capture in Boats on Land, which had elements of magic realism, where the mundane and the magical were very deeply entwined, and nobody really thought that that was strange. Oh, the man disappeared and he was taken by fairies, and okay, all right.
This was all narrated as stories.
It was quite a probable explanation,
So you do have, the entire book is tied together by, the myth and the magic of the oral tradition.
Yes.
Were you worried that it might promote a kind of stereotyping of the region, or might, promote some kind of negative image or a backward image?
Right. Well, I think that what I found interesting was that there were two kinds of literature that had emerged from Meghalaya, as far as I could see, and that was sort of the realist, sort of novelistic strain. People like Anjum Hassan, Siddharth Deb, Dhruba Hazarika, who'd all written realist fiction. And then you had the other writers who wrote about Khasi legends and folklore, like Kinpam Singh Nongkanri. And I wanted Boats on Land to be a bridge between both. I wanted it to fill the gap between the realist and the folkloric. And so what happened eventually was that events in history, or historical events, took a very important place within the stories. There's a tremendous amount of sort of political undertones that travel through the stories. There's stories about outsiders and takhars and people who sort of draw lines about identity. And I think that it actually helped to show the region as a place that had been as much shaped by history as any other place in the country. We had the world wars, the Christian missionaries, the British Empire. They all worked towards, completely changing the landscape of the place. And I hope that is what people carry away with them at the end.
Right. Finally, Janice, let's talk a bit about your forthcoming collection of poetry.
Right.
So your first book was a collection of short stories, your second is a novel, and third is a poetry anthology that's really you straddling all the literary forms.
No, it's a bit greedy.
So tell us about this book and when we can expect it.
Well, it's a really slim collection of poetry, which to be very honest, I haven't written much poetry lately, but I do hope that the small voice of the poet that lives in me is still sort of can be seen in my prose. I love the ambiguity of poetry, and I hope it infuses my prose as much as it does my verse. So the Memory of Place is a very slim collection of poems that I've been writing over the years, and it's called Poems from Shillong and Elsewhere. And it will be out sort of later in the year. I'm not too sure of the exact publication date, but I hope people enjoy it.
Of course.
Yeah.
Thank you, Janice, and thank you for joining us at Kitaabnama, Books and Beyond.
I'm reading few lines from my book Panty, and I'm reading from my novel Hypnosis, which is included in this book. In exactly the same way, there was never anyone named Meghdut in Ilona's life. Or it could be said that Meghdut's presence in Ilona Kuhumitra's life was not even the minor one that Shayan's was. But what happened one day was, Ilona woke up in the afternoon, bathed, and set off for her bank in Chorongi to collect her bank statement for the past 6 months. Just as she was about to park in the space allotted to the bank, a taxi overtook her and screeched to a halt in front of her at a wave from the passenger. Even before she could begin to wonder what was going on, Ilona had to swerve to the left and brake. The white car behind her also braked, almost colliding with hers. Ilona heard the driver abusing her in filthy language. Driving in Calcutta and never being abused was an unimaginable proposition. So Ilona Kuhumitra didn't pay any attention. A man opened the back door of the car and got out, came up to her window and tapped on it. Ilona looked up and recognized him. It was Megh Rai. Putting his hands in the pockets of his jeans, Meghdut said, "Very sorry. I realize you were not at fault. You were not at fault. Drivers inevitably use bad language in such situations. They cannot be stopped. They refuse to learn no matter how hard you try. This happens by default. Please don't mind." Taking off her sunglasses, Ilona Kuhumitra told Meghdut, "It's nothing. I have noticed choice epithets springing to my lips too in similar situations." She got out of the car as she was speaking. Finger combined his thick beard. Meghdut said, "I keep telling them to be extra respectful to women, in their mind of course, but also in their mind of course, but also in their behavior. Slow down when an aged lady is crossing the road. What use is it? They still do what they're used to doing, like now." "Don't be embarrassed," said Ilona Kuhumitra. "I'm not upset." Had she wanted to, she could have said, "Don't be embarrassed, Meg. Your music has acquainted us with your tastes and your sensibilities. By us, I'm referring to ordinary people, of course, who listen to your music and love it. Your music is sensitive, modern, developed, indoctrinated like civilized people. Maybe we cannot give it a specific label, but it will appeal to all contemporary people, ragas and raginis for instance. They are so eternal, almost like the sunshine and the sunset. The sun will rise and set whether the human species exists on earth or not. But some people create music that carries the mark of the journey of human civilization. It contains the additional layer of excellence embodied in human evolution. This music is the music of an individual, not the music of nature. You are a music composer of this stature, a master. I do not have the slightest doubt that you advise your driver to treat womankind on the streets with immense respect. But how was it possible to suddenly engage in a conversation of this nature on the road? Had anyone ever stood between two askew cars in the middle of Chorungi and said such things to another person? People in the cars, swerving around their stationary vehicles, glared at them. They sounded their horns too. With a smile, Meg said, "Thank you," and got into his car. So she too went back to hers, parked it in a suitable spot, and entered the back.